The Government of National Unity has lasted just over 100 days, and there's been quite a lot of chat about that. I suppose the fact that it's lasted 100 days is something of an achievement in and of itself. I did express the view the other day that the only real practical benefit of the 100 days of Government of National Unity so far is the gazetting of the new visa regulations by Home Affairs Minister Leon Schreiber last week. And I also added the comment that it's bizarre to hear the government welcoming something that they could so easily have done themselves years ago. But there we go. It happened, and we're grateful for it. For the rest, there are a lot of promises, there are a lot of commitments, but nothing practical has been done yet. Perhaps John Steenhuisen feels differently, the leader of the DA. John, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, John, and good afternoon to the listeners. And yes, I do feel very differently. Certainly from my own portfolio side, 3 major trade deals signed with the Chinese government that are going to be game changers in the agricultural sector, particularly for red meat exporters to the country who've suffered under an inability to export because of outbreaks of foot and mouth disease.
That's the kind of thing, John, where I go, surely that would have happened if the ANC had won 50% plus one or managed to cobble together a coalition with a couple of smaller parties. I mean, is that a GNU result?
Well, it's a government result,
Yeah.
and I think you can hypothesize as much as you like about what would have happened in a variety of other things. These are things that have happened. These are concrete things that have happened. The opening up of the discussions now with Starlink that will hopefully be able to bring good quality, fast internet to every corner of the country. That Solly Malatsi is doing, I think is something that could well have happened under the previous government, but didn't, and it's taken the formation of the GNU for these things to happen. So I think the country also would have been a very different place had the GNU not been formed. I think we would have seen overnight disinvestment. I think we would have seen capital flight. And I think you would have seen many more South Africans considering whether South Africa was a viable place. Now, even The Economist magazine says that the vibe in South Africa is lacquer. And we have to now transform that into a real reform agenda through the medium-term development plan to turn that sentiment into concrete reform and a very clear marker to international and local investors that this is a government that's serious about delivering economic growth and jobs over the next 5 years.
The Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, was quoted yesterday as saying there are no tensions in the GNU, and I went, come on. I can't believe that there are no tensions. What clearly is happening is that the tensions that I suspect must be there are being managed. And they're not resulting in any kind of retrogressive steps.
Well, I think that is correct, John. I think your analysis is spot on there. It's impossible for any 10-party coalition not to have tensions from time to time. But one of the key lessons that we learned in Germany last year when we went over to visit a number of states that had coalitions of different configurations of parties was that 2 things are very important, ongoing dialogue and trying to deal with issues behind the closed doors rather than out in the public. Because when you're dealing with them out in the public, it tends to end up with a situation, as we've seen with a number of other things, where things have been catastrophized, that, this is now going to be the end of the GNU because of X, Y, or Z. This is new territory for South Africa. There's 10 parties to this coalition. And we need to, there are obviously going to be issues where we disagree fundamentally. But I believe that the maturity and the sustainability of this is going to be through being able to have these adult conversations behind closed doors and trying to find compromise in each of these things. The reality is the ANC doesn't have a majority and it can't get everything at once. The DA doesn't have a majority, so it can't get everything at once. But all parties to the coalition should get something that they want. So I think that is, if we can approach from that way, I think that there's sustainability and a growing sense of longevity for the GNU going forward. Because frankly, the alternative is too ghastly to contemplate.
In the media statement you released on Friday, you said there are 4 specific things the DA will not agree to under any circumstances. Number 4 was the attempt by the EFF to win support for a private members' bill to change the ownership structure of the Reserve Bank. Now, there are people in the ANC that would like that to happen, but that seems the least likely of your non-negotiables to actually happen. Number 1 was further bailouts for state-owned enterprises. Yesterday, we had Caleb Kasim, the chief financial officer of Eskom, saying that our attempt to get money owed to us by municipalities isn't working, and if it doesn't start to work, we might need a further bailout. And I'm sure that your ears pricked up with that. And then implementation of the National Health Insurance Scheme and implementation of clauses 4 and 5 of Bella. With those two, President Ramaphosa signed the bill suspending clauses 4 and 5 for a 3-month period, which I think expires towards the middle of December. Are there negotiations you're aware of that are making progress in regard to those 2 clauses, which would allow provincial ministers of education to set admission policies and language policies for schools? And are there meaningful negotiations around an alternative to the National Health Insurance Scheme as set out in the bill?
Yes, to both of them. There's now been a technical team that's been set up within the bounds of the statement of intent for parties to have a discussion on the Bella issue. There are 4 parties to the coalition that are opposed to those clauses in the bill. And obviously, we will be working very hard with our counterparts to be able to try and find a way through this. I think that it's a retrogressive step, and I think that it is going to set back mother tongue education, not only for Afrikaans, but for all mother tongue education back considerably. On NHI, the reality is with the tight fiscal space, and I'm sure it will become more evident when the Minister of Finance delivers the medium-term budget later this month, that we're in a very tight fiscal space. The reality is we can't afford NHI. But I also think in this instance, there's no disagreement that we need universal access to basic health care for all South Africans, regardless of their income. And I think if we approach it from that perspective and spend the time and effort trying to say, well, what can we do? What are the first steps to make that happen? Rather than having a debate around the constitutionality of the clauses for the next 10 years, it's not going to move universal access to basic health care forward one iota, nor is it going to improve the service that people are receiving at the hospital door and in clinics. Surely we can find each other on what needs to be done to fix that experience for patients at the hospital, to improve the service delivery there, and get that moving before we start getting into these existential debates around constitutionalism and the like, which could delay the process for 10 years. Let's put down some concrete things that we know need to be done in order to set the scene for universal access to basic health care. It's not rocket science. We've done it in the Western Cape, very well-run public hospitals. You don't need to get rid of the private sector in order to make the public sector better. I think it's an and. It's both working together, much like Operation Bulendlela is working in some of the key space on energy and logistics. So too, I believe there can be a symbiotic relationship between public healthcare and private healthcare without us having this existential argument for the next 10 years.
John, I'm going to have to leave it there, but thank you for making time for us, DA leader and also Agriculture Minister John Steenhuisen.